we turn our attention to the emergence of African spiritual practices in politics. The African National Congress in KwaZulu-Natal is considering performing a cleansing ceremony in response to the high murder rates and violence in the province. Meanwhile, the EFF slaughtered a cow in what party leader Julius Malema described as a ceremony to appease the ancestors ahead of the party's 10-year anniversary commemoration. Political analyst Dr Fikile Vila joins us to take a look at the intersection between spirituality and politics. Thank you very much, Doc, for your time this morning. Perhaps let's just remind our viewers of what we heard from both the ANC and the EFF.
The ANC in KwaZulu-Natal is of the view that for a number of years there has been wars that have been fought in the province, which date back as far as 1818. And you will remember there have been many wars against when our people were resisting and defending their land. But also in the 90s, you'll remember that the apartheid government sponsored what we called the black-on-black violence. And ever since, KwaZulu-Natal has now become one of the most violent provinces. The provincial leadership then met, and then we came out with a view that maybe it's high time that we first and foremost unite all religious people, priests from different churches, traditional healers, and then task elders, such as the former president of South Africa, Comrade Jacob Zuma, former premier of KwaZulu-Natal, Premier Willis Mkhunu, and Dr. Sazi from the Council of Traditional Healers, that they come together and lead all political parties in a cleansing ceremony where we'll require those who pray to pray for our province and those abapahlayo to also do that and appease our ancestors so that we close the long period of violence that have engulfed our province.
Dr. Fikile Vila, what is your understanding?
Good morning, Tutu, and to viewers at home. This is a long overdue process generally for South Africa. One of the things that we have been saying, I belong to a body of healers and feminists called the Lost Love Rebels Feminist Collective and Equelo Healers Collective, and I'm also the chairperson of the Traditional Health Practitioners Council of South Africa. And we have been imagining this to be happening, Tutu, because if you remember, Ushaka Zulu, Inkosi, left a curse for KwaZulu-Natal in particular, but for the nation, way back when he was murdered, he said, meaning that you are not going to rule this nation. It will be ruled by the colonizers because of the rift that it was happening between him and his brothers. So one of the things that we've been saying in our analysis and reading spiritually and politically is that you need to break that curse. And the umkondo wake that was murdered was never washed, Tutu. And to the Zulu kingdom and to the nation generally in South Africa, we need to have to return to the power of ritual. There is something very important about the power of ritual when we are talking politics, because when you are sitting with a case of that nature, as a people, which happened in that dispensation of negotiating between the colonizers and our chiefs and our kings, you need to take that into cognizance because it spills over into our politics. So one of the things that is key in terms of Ugupahla, which is a ritual of appeasing the ancestors, is to remember that we are sitting with these cases, and I think the practice of Ugupahla needs to be a very, very important component of our politics. And I'll tell you something else to Tuzile and viewers at home. What we have seen is subsequently happening as we entered the apartheid dispensation, the killing and the murder of Uferwood, the former prime minister of the apartheid regime, in our parliament. He was murdered. He was actually stabbed sitting in parliament. And there was never a cleansing that was done in our parliament. Now, in terms of culture, in terms of isintu, what happens is that when someone dies in a space of that nature, because the Parliament of South Africa is our sacred space, we call it umsamo wethu as a nation. If you don't do cleansing of those kinds of spirits that are sitting either in the chiefdoms or in the queendoms or in what we call parliament today in our democracy, you are then sitting with these spirits that are going to repeat themselves in the form of the murders and the killings that we are seeing today. And of course, those cases continue to experiment themselves, when we talk about spiritually and politically, in the kinds of problems that we are sitting with as a nation, where we will never have proper leadership. And this thing is something that Umama Ubalete Mbeke mentioned at some point with the rifts that are happening within the ANC, to say the ANC needs cleansing. It's something that we have been saying. The ANC needs to go to heritage sites. In fact, all of us as a nation, because what actually happened with the colonization and the negotiations there is that we angered our ancestors. We gave up land, for example, which is a sacred space as a people. We gave up the whole culture, the whole language of who we are as Abantu, as Batu. And that is something that is bound to anger our ancestors. Bodies of people have dropped during these wars that we have seen over time, since 1818, perhaps even before, in the 1400s, during the period of slavery. Nothing was done in the succession of the leaderships that we have seen coming to cleanse and to return, to Umsamo, and say we have done wrong. We need to reconnect ourselves as a people. Instead, we are having the kinds of leadership that continue to deepen that anger of the ancestors. So spiritually speaking, what EFF is doing is perhaps a step in the right direction, and it's something that we've been saying it is really long overdue. This is something where any political party that comes into power, even if you go into coalitions, we need to take the nation not just as a once-off event. Ukuphatla is a way of life. Ukuphatla is a part of who we are as African people, as Batu. It's called, when we talk about Ubuntu, is really embedded in the philosophical ways of living collectively, sharing from the resources of the nation. And if we separate spirituality from politics...
Yeah, I do beg your pardon if you'd allow me to join you just for the purpose of time. And please do forgive my ignorance. I ask because we ask because we are searching for answers, right, as people. And so when we speak of appeasing the ancestors, or the ancestors are not happy, and hence things are manifesting in a particular way that they are manifesting for us as a country today, what do you say to somebody who asks the question that you and I will be the ancestor of tomorrow? And so what is it that we are doing while we are alive that will leave people better tomorrow, right? So if you are put in a position of power and you hire a hitman, or you eat monies, for lack of a better expression, or your finger is in the cookie jar where it's not supposed to be, are you the very same person that tomorrow people must call upon to fix the problem that you left today?
That's a very, very good question. It doesn't mean that when you're talking to the ancestors, all ancestors are innocent. You have got ancestors that have committed crimes. You've got, people who have lived, because when you talk about ancestors, we're talking about great-grandparents who have lived on this earth. Some of them have really committed grave, wrongdoings, as we see today in our leadership, issues of corruption, issues of killings, and so on. So when we are saying then cleanse, some of the spirits, there's a process, there's a ritual, spirits that have contaminated our politics and our spaces. So you acknowledge the fact that even those who live today who are going to become ancestors tomorrow, we must know that if they continue to do the wrongdoing, and you are saying you are going to go and appease the situation, it means then the generation that follows carries the burden of having to correct the mistakes that were committed by ancestors in the past, including the issue that I'm mentioning about Nkosi Shaka Zulu. It doesn't mean that he's an innocent ancestor in that regard. It means then that the negotiations that happened there around colonization, where some scholars and thinkers and activists would claim that we were sold out there in those negotiations. Perhaps that is why Utingani, wanted to actually commit this act of murder. We see it also happening in Samazulu today. that the kings and chiefs continue to fight for resources instead of servicing the people. So ancestors themselves are not innocent in that sense. They are not all beautiful spirits. So as we go to this ritual of cleansing as a nation, we also need to be able to have the spirit of discernment, right? And honesty. To say, when we talk to the ancestors, you are able to also say that you have committed these crimes and you need to be able to take the nation out of this space. So it's also Ukuphatla is also at that level that says, you're not just saying that spirits and guides are pure spirits. There are spirits that really have done damage to the nation, and they continue from generation to generation, because spirit is something that you inherit, right? It continues to live forever in different bodies. And if you're going to continue to inherit these spirits, like I'm mentioning, because we don't cleanse, because which is that ritual of going to throw away bad spirits, it's going to continue from generation to generation. So even today, the leaders we have are going to be ancestors of tomorrow, and we are going to continue to have our children inheriting the same type of leadership that we've got, and we are not going to really lift ourselves then from the oppressions of the past. And it's a spiritual revolution. I've always said that decolonization, the slavery and apartheid, those are deeply spiritually orchestrated agendas. We know that the Bible was used. We know that belief and conscience was used to name people certain things, to call people certain things. So it was inculcated into our spirits. So we have to lift ourselves from that. And those is what we call curses. So spirits carry both blessings and curses. It's not just one pure thing. And I think you need to then have that level of spiritual intelligence and commitment and practice to say, Masia M Saba, when you say you're going to slaughter and appease, who are we appeasing? Who are we bringing back? Who are we invoking? And who are we not? So that we can truly heal ourselves as a nation.
And Dr. Vila, the ANC in KwaZulu-Natal also spoke about the role of the church in the cleansing ceremony. And so what will the role of the church be?
The role of the church is quite dicey in that, Duduzile, we have seen that the church is captured in majority, right? And I'm talking here about the Pentecostal churches and so on. As I've just mentioned, colonization was a doctrine that was brought in through the missionaries. So when we are engaging the church, also when you talk about moral regeneration, these are some of the things that were mentioned during the presidency of former President Jacob Zuma. Moral regeneration has got to be scrutinized. The role of the church has got to be scrutinized in intervening in the politics of the nation, and especially because South Africa is a secular state. We're not the kind of state that is really religious, right? So we have to be careful in the manner that the church comes in such a manner that the church is not perpetuating the doctrine of colonization, separating us from our ways of being, condemning the ways of being Abantu as a people. And we know that in this day that we live in, the church is really demonstrating problematic elements of leadership, where we are seeing deep-seated violences, corruption within the church, gender-based violence and femicide and so on. So the church in itself is not a clean institution, and all other institutions are not really pure, as I'm saying. So even as we say that the church must come in through prayer, through intercession, through leadership and guidance, we also have to be skeptical in the manner that the church speaks, because there are things that the church has done which are problematic, including other spiritual formations as well. So we are at a time as a country, Tutuzile, that is very, very crucial, that we can't just take anything for granted and say that because you are a pastor, because you're a minister, you're therefore. No. We know that that is not true. So we need to be honest with each other and just really operate from that place of saying not all churches are clean, not all traditional institutions are clean. So we need to come into a conversation that says we are going to open up to each other as honestly as possible, but also point out the elements within the church that continue to perpetuate the agenda of the colonizer, and deal with those aspects and say there have been African churches in the past, right? How do we draw to what we call church today from the indigenous perspective of who we are as a people, so that we truly regain ourselves. Otherwise, if we say we are going to continue just blindly engaging the church to lead and guide the nation without scrutinizing whether it is doing away with colonization and apartheid, we are going to dangerously move into a future that continues to deepen oppressions in what we call now a post-colonial state in South Africa, where the colonial does not disappear, but it stays in the name of worship.
Dr. Fikile Vila, guys, is a political analyst. Thank you very much for your time this morning.